The massive doors of the Galactic Council chamber slid open with a sound like thunder. Ambassador Jake Morrison walked through them with steady steps, his black uniform crisp and his face calm. Behind him came his small team of human advisors, their footsteps echoing in the vast space that could hold 10,000 beings. The chamber itself was a marvel of alien engineering. Crystalline walls rose hundreds of feet into the air, glowing with soft blue light. Floating platforms held the representatives of 67 different species, each one designed to accommodate their unique biology. The air shimmered with translation fields that converted every word into thousands of languages instantly. Jake had been to this chamber many times over the past 5 years as Earth's ambassador. Each time he felt the weight of history pressing down on him. For 300 years, humanity had been the youngest member of the Galactic Council. They were told they should be grateful for the honor. They were reminded constantly that they were lucky to be accepted at all. Commander Lisa Hayes watched from the observation deck high above. She wore the dark blue uniform of the Terran Space Fleet and carried herself like the military officer she was. Her eyes never left Jake as he approached the center speaking platform. She knew what was coming. They all did. The other species barely looked at the humans as they took their places. The Vexani floated in their crystal shells, beings of pure energy that looked like living diamonds. Their representatives whispered to each other in voices that sounded like wind chimes. They had been the most powerful species in the Council for over 2,000 years. Next to them hovered the Threx delegation. These insect-like creatures stood 8 feet tall on 6 legs, their compound eyes reflecting the chamber's light like black mirrors. Their mandibles clicked constantly as they communicated in their strange language. They controlled the largest military force in known space. The ethereals drifted near the ceiling, beings of gas and energy that barely existed in normal space. They appeared as shifting clouds of silver and gold, speaking in frequencies that made the air itself vibrate. They were the oldest known species, claiming to have existed since the universe was young. Counselor Zixth of the Vexani began the young session. Her voice rang out like crystal bells, clear and cold. The Council recognizes Ambassador Morrison of the Human Federation. You may speak. Jake stepped forward and activated his personal communicator. His voice carried to every corner of the massive chamber through the translation system. Honored Council members, I come before you today to discuss the new resource allocation protocol that was announced yesterday. A ripple of sound moved through the chamber. The various species made their own forms of acknowledgement. Some clicked, others hummed, and a few simply glowed brighter. They all knew what the resource allocation protocol meant. It was the Council's way of taking whatever they wanted from member species. As you all know, Jake continued, humanity has faithfully served the Council for 3 centuries. We have provided resources, technology, and military support whenever requested. We have followed every directive and respected every boundary placed upon us. Counselor Zixith's crystalline form flickered with impatience. Yes, yes, and the Council appreciates human compliance. Your species has proven surprisingly useful, despite your youth. The casual dismissal in her tone would have angered most humans, but Jake remained calm. He had expected this. He had prepared for this moment for years. The new protocol requires Earth and all human colonies to surrender 60% of our total industrial output. This includes food production, manufacturing, and energy generation. Correct, Zixith replied. The Council has need of these resources for the new expansion project into the Outer Rim territories. It is a great honor for humanity to contribute to such an important endeavor. Furthermore, Jake said, his voice never changing in tone, the protocol forbids human exploration beyond our current territorial boundaries. We are to remain within the sectors already assigned to us, with no possibility of expansion. A Threx counselor named Ixth clicked his mandibles in what passed for laughter among his species. Humans reproduce so quickly and consume so much. It is better for the galaxy if you remain contained. The Council knows what is best. Jake looked up at the observation deck where Lisa Hayes stood watching. Their eyes met for just a moment, and she gave him the smallest possible nod. It was time. "I see," Jake said, turning back to face the assembled council. "And what voice do humans have in these decisions? What representation do we have in determining our own fate?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Several species began making angry sounds. The very idea that humans might question council decisions was apparently shocking to them. Counselor Zixith's form blazed brighter with what could only be described as outrage. "Humans are junior members of this council. You have the voice that your age and experience warrant. The senior species make decisions based on wisdom gathered over millions of years. Your species has existed in space for less than 500 years. You are children playing with toys you barely understand." The insult was delivered with casual cruelty, but Jake had heard worse over the years. Every human diplomat had. They were constantly reminded of their place in the galactic hierarchy. They were told they should be grateful for the scraps they were given. "I understand the Council's position," Jake said quietly, "and I have come here today to deliver humanity's response." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small device. With the press of a button, it projected a holographic document into the air above the speaking platform. The text was simple and clear, translated into every language used by Council species. "The United Terran Federation formally withdraws from the Galactic Council, effective immediately." The silence that followed was complete and absolute. For several long seconds, no being in the chamber made a sound. Then the noise began. Clicking, chittering, humming, and frequencies that human ears could not even detect filled the air. The translation system struggled to keep up with the flood of outraged communications. Counselor Zixith's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "This is impossible. No species has ever voluntarily left the Council. The consequences will be severe." Jake smiled for the first time since entering the chamber. It was not a pleasant expression. "The consequences of staying have already become unacceptable. Humanity chooses freedom over servitude. You choose death," hissed Ixth of the Threx. "No species can survive alone in this galaxy. The Council provides protection, trade, and technology. Without us, humanity will be destroyed by the first hostile force that finds you." "Perhaps," Jake replied, "but we will face that future as free beings, not as slaves." The chamber erupted again, but Jake was already walking toward the exit. His small team followed him, their heads held high despite the angry sounds filling the air around them. They had known this would be the reaction. They had prepared for war. On the observation deck, Lisa Hayes was already moving toward her own exit. She had a ship to catch and a message to deliver. President Carol Jenkins was waiting on Earth for confirmation that the deed was done. The Terran space fleet was already mobilizing GOT as Jake reached the chamber doors. Counselor Zixith's voice followed him. "You have made the greatest mistake in human history, Ambassador Morrison. The Council's response will be swift and final. Your species will regret this decision for whatever short time you have left." Jake paused at the threshold and looked back. "One last time, perhaps, but our children will be free, and that makes any price worth paying." The doors closed behind the human delegation with a sound like thunder. In the chamber, 67 species began planning humanity's destruction. They would learn, in time, that they had greatly underestimated their former servants. The emergency session of the Galactic Council began 3 hours after humanity's withdrawal. Counselor Zixth floated at the center of the chamber, her crystalline form pulsing with angry energy. Around her, representatives from 66 species filled the air with sounds of outrage and disbelief. "This cannot be allowed to stand," she declared, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "If humanity is permitted to leave the Council without consequence, other species may follow their example. The order we have maintained for 10,000 years will collapse." Ixth of the Threx clicked his mandibles in agreement. The humans must be made an example. Their colonies must burn. Their fleets must be scattered. Every species in the galaxy must see what happens to those who defy the Council. Within 6 hours, the largest military force in galactic history began to assemble at the edge of human space. The Vexani contributed their reality-warping dreadnoughts, massive crystal ships that could bend space itself to their will. Each one was 3 miles long and carried enough firepower to destroy a planet. The Threx brought their swarming bioships, living vessels grown rather than built. These creatures of metal and flesh could reproduce in battle, creating new ships from the wreckage of their enemies. They moved in perfect coordination, like insects following the commands of a hive mind. The ethereals deployed their phase-shifting destroyers, ships that existed partially outside normal spacetime. They could appear anywhere without warning, and fire weapons that ignored conventional defenses. No species had ever found an effective counter to ethereal technology. 40-7 other species contributed ships to the punitive fleet. Some came willingly, eager to prove their loyalty to the Council. Others joined out of fear, knowing that refusing to participate would mark them as potential rebels. The combined armada stretched across space for millions of miles. Captain Ben Foster stood on the bridge of the UTS Freedom, watching the enemy fleet approach through the viewscreen. His ship was humanity's newest and most advanced battleship, but it looked like a toy compared to the alien vessels bearing down on them. The human fleet defending this sector numbered only 200 ships against an enemy force of 60,000. "Sir," called Lieutenant Amy Russell from her position at the tactical station, "enemy fleet will be within weapons range in 30 minutes. They're maintaining standard Council formation patterns." Ben nodded grimly. The Council had used the same tactical doctrines for centuries. Their formations were precise, elegant, and completely predictable. That predictability was about to become their greatest weakness. "Signal all ships," Ben ordered. "Begin implementing Protocol 7. Let them see what 300 years of watching and learning has taught us." The human fleet began to move in ways that defied traditional space combat doctrine. Instead of forming neat battle lines, they scattered across a 3-dimensional volume of space that stretched for thousands of miles. Each ship operated independently, while remaining connected through quantum communication links that the Council had never seen before. Dr. Lisa Carter monitored the battle from her position aboard the command ship. Her research team had spent decades studying captured alien technology, learning how each species thought and fought. More importantly, they had developed countermeasures that no alien species could have imagined. The first shots of the war came from a Vexani dreadnought. Its reality-warping cannon fired a beam of pure destruction that should have vaporized 3 human ships instantly. Instead, the beam struck adaptive shields that had been designed specifically to counter Vexani weapons. The energy was absorbed, converted, and redirected back at the attacker. "Impossible," whispered Commander Zethra aboard the Vexani flagship. "Their technology should not be able to interact with our reality manipulation systems." But it was not just technology that made the difference. Commander Steve Harrison led a squadron of human fighters in an attack that no alien tactician could have predicted. Instead of engaging the enemy ships directly, they targeted the communication relays that connected the alien fleet. Within minutes, the perfect Council formation began to break apart as ships lost contact with their commanders. The Threx bioships attempted to swarm a group of human destroyers, confident that their superior numbers would overwhelm the smaller force. Engineer Amy Russell had anticipated this tactic and equipped the human ships with something the galaxy had never seen before. Adaptive combat systems that learned from every attack and developed new countermeasures in real time. When the first bioship fired its acid cannons, the human shields adapted to neutralize the acid within seconds. When they released their metal-eating parasites, the human hull plating evolved to become toxic to the alien organisms. Each attack made the human ships stronger and more resilient. Admiral Kate Sullivan coordinated the overall defense from her flagship, the UT Defiance. She watched her tactical displays with growing amazement as her outnumbered fleet began to gain the upper hand. The aliens had superior individual technologies, but they had never faced an enemy that could learn and adapt at the speed of human innovation. "All ships, begin Phase 2, she commanded. "Show them what happens when they corner a species that refuses to die quietly." The human fleet suddenly went on the offensive. Ships that had been desperately defending themselves moments before now began hunting their attackers with predatory efficiency. They used the aliens' own superior speed and firepower against them, luring them into traps that exploited weaknesses in their formation patterns. Captain Dan Miller commanded a heavy cruiser that engaged an ethereal destroyer in what should have been a hopeless battle. The alien ship could phase in and out of normal space at will, making it nearly impossible to target. But Miller had studied ethereal technology for years and knew their phase shifts followed quantum patterns that could be predicted. When the destroyer materialized to fire its phase disruptors, Miller was ready. His ship's weapons were all ready, aimed at the exact spot where the alien vessel would appear. The destroyer took a full broadside of human plasma cannons before it could phase out again, its exotic matter hull cracking under the unexpected assault. The psychological impact on the Council fleet was devastating. These were species that had dominated the galaxy for millennia, each one convinced of their natural superiority over younger races. The idea that humans could not only resist their combined might but actually fight back effectively was beyond their comprehension. "Retreat," ordered Commander Zethra, as his flagship's shields began to fail under human fire. "Reform at the secondary position. We need to analyze their technology before proceeding." But there would be no safe retreat. The human fleet pursued the withdrawing aliens with relentless efficiency, picking off stragglers and damaged ships with surgical precision. They had spent 3 centuries learning to fight a defensive war, but now they were teaching the galaxy what human warfare looked like. When the gloves came off, by the end of the first battle, the Council had lost over 3,000 ships, while the humans had lost fewer than 50. The survivors limped back to their staging areas in shock and confusion, their confidence shattered by an enemy they had dismissed as primitive servants. The war that was supposed to end in hours had only just begun, and already the galaxy would never be the same. The war that the Council expected to end in days stretched into months, and what they discovered horrified them beyond imagination. Humanity had not simply prepared defenses during their 3 centuries of servitude. They had built something the galaxy had never seen before, a war machine designed to turn every limitation into an advantage. Colonel Rick Davis stood in the ruins of what had once been Threk's military outpost on the planet Kepler-7. His battalion had taken the heavily fortified position using nothing but mining equipment and industrial tools converted into weapons. The alien defenders had possessed superior armor, better weapons, and overwhelming numbers, but they had never faced humans who refused to fight by the established rules. "Sir," called Sergeant Paula Hayes as she approached through the smoking wreckage, "we found their communication center intact. The enemy tried to destroy it, but Lieutenant Karen White managed to cut the power before they could wipe the databanks." Rick nodded with satisfaction. This was how humans fought wars. While other species focused on destroying their enemies, humans captured everything they could get their hands on. Every piece of alien technology became a puzzle to solve. Every tactical doctrine became a weakness to exploit. The Threks had designed their outpost according to military principles that had worked for thousands of years. High walls, overlapping fields of fire, and choke points that would force attackers into killing zones. But Rick's battalion had not attacked the walls. They had tunneled underneath them using mining equipment, then erupted from the ground inside. The base like something from the enemy's worst nightmares. Lieutenant Sarah Williams had become legendary throughout the human forces for her ability to turn any available materials into devastating weapons. On the mining colony of New Detroit, she had converted ore processing equipment into particle beam cannons that could punch through Vexani crystal halls. On the agricultural world of Green Valley, she had turned irrigation systems into chemical warfare dispersal networks that had driven off an entire ethereal invasion fleet. The thing about humans, she explained to a group of newly arrived reinforcements, is that we see possibilities where other species see limitations. That plasma, Cutter was designed to slice through asteroid rock, but plasma is plasma. Point it at an enemy ship, and it becomes a weapon. Hook it up to a targeting computer, and it becomes artillery. Captain Dan Miller had taken this philosophy to its logical extreme. His engineering teams could repair and upgrade human ships using salvaged alien technology in ways that would have made the original designers weep with despair. Threx bioships found themselves integrated with Vexani crystal matrices and ethereal phase generators, creating hybrid vessels that possessed capabilities no single species could have imagined. The Council forces discovered that fighting humans was like wrestling with smoke. Just when they thought they understood human tactics, the enemy would do something completely different. Traditional military doctrine taught that fleets engaged in organized formations using established patterns of maneuver. Human fleets scattered across space like swarms of angry insects, each ship operating independently while somehow maintaining perfect coordination. Dr. Nancy Clark had developed the quantum communication network that made this possible. Her breakthrough in instantaneous data sharing meant that every human ship knew what every other human ship was doing at all times. When one vessel learned something new about enemy capabilities, that information spread to the entire fleet within seconds. The aliens think in terms of hierarchies, she explained during a briefing with Admiral Kate Sullivan. They have commanders who give orders to subordinates who carry them out. But our system makes every ship captain a commander and every crew member a decision maker. We can adapt faster because we do not waste time asking permission to think. This principle extended to every level of human military operations. When scientist Paul Adams encountered Threx bioweapons that were immune to conventional ammunition, he did not wait for orders from headquarters. He immediately began developing synthetic viruses that would turn the aliens' living ships against their own crews. Within a week, entire Threx battle groups were fleeing from their own vessels as the modified organisms spread through their fleets. The psychological warfare component was perhaps the most disturbing aspect of human military doctrine from the aliens' perspective. While Council species fought according to ancient codes of honor that limited their tactics, humans used every possible advantage without hesitation. They attacked supply convoys, disrupted communication networks, and spread disinformation that turned allied species against each other. General Ryan Brooks coordinated these efforts from his headquarters on Luna Base, Earth's moon. His staff included experts in alien psychology who had studied every Council species for decades. They knew which races were naturally suspicious of each other, which ones could be turned against their allies through carefully planted evidence, and which ones would break under sustained pressure. War is not a game, he explained to his officers during one strategic planning session. It is not about honor or glory or following rules that make our enemies feel comfortable. It is about survival and humans will do whatever is necessary to survive. The Ethereals learned this lesson when human forces began using their own phase technology against them. Captain Ellen Moore had captured an intact ethereal destroyer and turned it over to human scientists. Within months, human ships were equipped with phase generators that allowed them to appear anywhere in the galaxy without warning. The Ethereals found themselves under attack in their own home systems by enemies. Using their own supposedly unique technology, the Vexani faced a similar shock when human engineers learned to manipulate reality-warping fields. Their crystal dreadnoughts had been invulnerable for millions of years, but humans treated invulnerability as just another engineering problem to solve. Admiral Tom Garcia led the first successful assault on a Vexani stronghold using reality manipulation techniques that the crystalline beings themselves had never considered possible. But perhaps the most devastating human capability was there: refusal to accept defeat. Other species would surrender when faced with impossible odds, or retreat when their losses became too heavy. Humans simply adapted their tactics and kept fighting. When their ships were destroyed, they built new ones. When their weapons proved ineffective, they invented better ones. When their enemies developed countermeasures, they found new approaches that made those countermeasures irrelevant. The Council forces found themselves facing an enemy that grew stronger with every battle. Each engagement taught the humans something new about alien capabilities, and that knowledge was immediately incorporated into improved tactics and technologies. What had begun as a simple punitive expedition against rebellious servants had become a fight for survival against an opponent that refused to follow any of the established rules of galactic warfare. By the end of the first year, the impossible had happened. The Council was losing the war, and their member species were beginning to question whether serving under human leadership might be preferable to facing human opposition. Captain Ellen Moore stood on the bridge of her flagship as it approached the Karathi homeworld. The planet below had been under Threk's occupation for over 1,000 years, its people enslaved and its resources stripped away to feed the Council's endless appetite for expansion. Today, that would change. "Sir," reported Lieutenant Kevin Stone from his position at the sensor station, "we are detecting massive orbital defense platforms around the planet. The Threks have at least 200 bioships in defensive positions, plus their ground-based installations." Ellen studied the tactical display with calm eyes. 2 years ago, such odds would have been considered hopeless for a human fleet. Now, after 24 months of continuous warfare against the Council, her officers looked at the enemy formations with professional interest rather than fear. "Signal the Liberation Fleet," she ordered. "Begin Operation Freedom. Show the Karathi that help has finally arrived." The human fleet moved toward the planet in a formation that no Council tactician could have predicted. Instead of massing their ships for a direct assault, they spread out across a massive volume of space, each vessel taking a different approach vector. The Threk's commanders watched in confusion as their enemies seemed to scatter randomly. The first attack came not from the human warships, but from tiny pods that had been launched days earlier. These stealth devices had drifted through the outer system like space debris, ignored by the Threk's sensors that were designed to detect large military vessels. When they reached their target positions, they activated and began broadcasting a signal that every Karathi on the planet could receive. "People of Karathi," came the voice of Ambassador Helen White, speaking in the alien's native language, "this is the Human Liberation Fleet. Your 1,000 years of slavery end today. Fight for your freedom, and we will fight beside you." The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. The Karathi had been conquered so long ago that most of them had never imagined freedom was possible. But humans had studied their history and culture during a long voyage to their world. They knew that the Karathi had once been proud warriors before the Threks crushed their spirit with centuries of brutal oppression. On the planet's surface, Karathi workers in the mining complexes began to sabotage their equipment. In the agricultural zones, the alien farmers destroyed their own crops rather than let them feed their oppressors. In the cities, riots broke out as a million enslaved beings suddenly remembered what it meant to hope. The Threx fleet commander, a veteran named Zythka, ordered his ships to begin orbital bombardment of the rebellious population centers. But his bioships never got the chance to fire. Admiral Tom Garcia had anticipated this reaction and positioned his fleet to exploit the enemy's predictable response. When the Threx ships turned their weapons toward the planet, they exposed their vulnerable rear sections to human attack. Plasma, cannons, and quantum torpedoes struck the bioships before they could adjust their formations. More importantly, the human weapons had been specifically designed to exploit weaknesses that Dr. Lisa Carter's research teams had discovered in Threx. Biology. Their ships are living creatures, she had explained during the pre-mission briefing. They feel pain, they can be frightened, and they can be turned against their own crews if you know how to do it. The human weapons carried more than just explosive force. They delivered tailored viruses that interfered with the bioship's nervous systems, causing them to ignore their crew's commands and flee toward the outer system in panic. Within minutes, the seemingly impregnable Threx defense fleet was scattered and demoralized. Captain Julia Baker led the ground assault teams that landed in the planet's major cities. Her soldiers moved through the urban areas with the support of newly liberated Karathi fighters who knew every street and building. The Threx occupation forces found themselves facing an enemy that appeared from nowhere and vanished before they could respond. "The humans fight like ghosts," reported one surviving Threx officer. "They are here, and they are not here. Then they are behind you with weapons you have never seen before." The liberation of Karathi took less than 6 hours. When it was over, 1 million enslaved beings were free for the first time in their lives. But more importantly for the war effort, humanity had gained its first alien allies. The grateful Karathi brought their own ships and warriors to the human cause, doubling the size of the Liberation Fleet overnight. The psychological impact on the Mon Council was even more devastating than the military victory. Word of the Karathi liberation spread throughout the galaxy faster than official communications could suppress it. Species that had been subjugated for millennia began to whisper about the possibility of freedom. More critically, some council members began to question whether they were fighting on the wrong side. The Nalarai were the first to make secret contact with human diplomats. This ancient species had been forced to contribute ships and resources to the Council war effort, despite their own moral objections to the conflict. Ambassador Helen White received their envoys in a clandestine meeting on a neutral space station. "In the Outer Rim, we have served the Council for 3,000 years, explained the Nalari representative, a being whose crystalline body pulsed with nervous energy. "We have followed their orders, paid their tributes, and sent our children to die in their wars. But what they are doing to your species is wrong, and we can no longer remain silent." The Nalori Alliance provided humanity with something even more valuable than ships and weapons. They brought detailed intelligence about Council military capabilities, internal politics, and strategic weaknesses that no amount of battlefield experience could have revealed. Helen White's diplomatic team used this information to identify other potential allies and to exploit divisions within the Council hierarchy. Dr. Kevin Stone's research into Council technology patterns had reached a breakthrough point. His teams could now predict alien tactical innovations before they were deployed, often developing countermeasures within hours of encountering new enemy weapons. The humans had become not just adaptive, but prophetic in their military responses. War's turning point came at the siege of Vex Prime, the crystalline homeworld that had been the center of Council power for 2 millennia. The planet was protected by reality-warping defenses that made conventional attack impossible. No enemy fleet had ever successfully penetrated the Vexani homeworld's protective barriers. Commander Julia Baker led the assault using a combination of captured ethereal phase technology and human quantum physics that the Vexani had never encountered before. Her ships appeared inside the planet's defensive perimeter without warning, bypassing the reality warping fields entirely through dimensional manipulation techniques that human scientists had developed. The sight of human warships in orbit above the supposedly impregnable Vexani capital sent shockwaves throughout the galaxy. If the Council's most powerful species could be threatened in their own home system, then nowhere was safe from human retaliation. Council members who had enthusiastically supported the war began demanding immediate peace negotiations. Species that had contributed ships to the punitive fleet started withdrawing their forces. The united front that had seemed so powerful 2 years earlier was crumbling as member species realized that humanity had become too dangerous to oppose and too valuable to enemy. The impossible had happened. The galaxy's former servants had become its new masters, and the old order was collapsing faster than anyone could have imagined. The message arrived on every inhabited world in the galaxy simultaneously. It bypassed Council communication networks, ignored military encryption, and appeared on screens in homes, offices, and government buildings across thousands of star systems. The speaker was President Carol Jenkins, and her words would reshape the destiny of every living being in known space. "People of the galaxy," she began, her voice calm but carrying the weight of absolute authority. "The war is over. A galactic council has ceased to exist as of this moment. But humanity does not seek to rule over you as they did. We offer something different. We offer you a choice." Across the galaxy, beings who had lived their entire lives under council rule listened in stunned silence. On Vex Prime, the crystalline survivors of humanity's orbital assault huddled in their damaged cities. On Threx worlds, the insectoid warriors clicked their mandibles in confusion. Even the ancient ethereals, beings of pure energy who claimed to predate the universe itself, focused their attention on the human leader's unprecedented announcement. "The Galactic Democratic Federation is now open for membership, President." Jenkins continued. "Every species, regardless of age, size, or technological development, is welcome to join as an equal partner. There will be no tributes, no forced resource allocation, and no restrictions on exploration or development. The only requirement is a commitment to peaceful cooperation and mutual respect." Commander Nick Turner stood in the first joint human-alien research facility, watching scientists from 12 different species work together on projects that would have been impossible under the old council system. Vexani crystal manipulation techniques were being combined with human quantum physics. Threx biological engineering was enhanced by ethereal energy manipulation. Korathi metallurgy was revolutionizing Nalari ship construction. "It is remarkable," observed Dr. Zethara, a Vexani scientist who had chosen to work with the humans rather than continue the hopeless resistance. Under the Council, knowledge was hoarded by individual species. Each race guarded their technological secrets jealously. But humans share everything freely, and in return, they learn from everyone. The transformation was indeed remarkable. The rigid caste system that had dominated galactic civilization for 10,000 years was crumbling, replaced by a merit-based society that valued innovation over tradition. Species that had been considered inferior under the old system suddenly found themselves contributing vital technologies and insights to projects that benefited everyone. Admiral Kate Sullivan, now serving as the first director of Galactic Defense, oversaw the integration of former enemies into a unified fleet. The ships that had once faced each other in deadly combat now worked together to explore unknown regions of space and defend against external threats that lay beyond the galactic rim. The hardest part, she explained to a gathering of alien fleet, Commanders, was convincing some species that we really meant what we said about equality. They kept waiting for the moment when humans would reveal their true intentions and impose the same kind of hierarchy the Council had maintained. They could not believe that we actually wanted partners instead of servants. The proof came in the establishment of the new government structure itself. Instead of the Council's authoritarian system, where the oldest and most powerful species made all decisions, humans created democratic institutions that gave every member species a voice proportional to their population and contribution. The old tribute system was abolished, replaced with voluntary trade agreements that allowed each world to develop according to its own needs and capabilities. Most importantly, the restrictions on technological development were lifted completely. Species that had been forbidden from pursuing certain research areas for millennia suddenly found themselves free to explore and innovate. The resulting explosion of scientific advancement exceeded even human expectations. Representative Chris Johnson delivered the opening address to the First Galactic Democratic Assembly on New Geneva, a space station that had been jointly constructed by 15 different species. The massive structure rotated slowly in space, its hull gleaming with crystalline panels provided by the Vexani, organic sections grown by the Threx, and phase-shifted components contributed by the Ethereals. We gather here today not as conquerors and conquered, he said to the assembled delegates, but as equals united in our determination to build a better future for all sentient life. The old galaxy was built on fear and domination. The new galaxy will be built on hope and cooperation. The chamber itself was a marvel of cooperative engineering. Environmental systems accommodated the needs of dozens of different species simultaneously. Translation technology that surpassed anything that Council had developed allowed perfect communication between beings who had never been able to speak directly to each other before. Most remarkably, the entire structure was powered by a fusion of technologies that no single species could have created alone. The economic transformation was equally dramatic. Under the Council system, resources had flowed upward to the most powerful species, while the weaker ones struggled with artificial scarcity. The new Federation established trade networks based on mutual benefit rather than exploitation. Worlds that had been stripped bare by Council resource extraction began to rebuild and prosper. Captain Dan Miller found himself commanding a mixed crew that included humans, Korathi Nalori, and even some reformed Threx who had chosen cooperation over continued conflict. His ship was exploring regions of space that had been off-limits under the old system, searching for new worlds and new forms of life to welcome into the growing Federation. The strangest thing, he noted in his log, is how natural this feels. Species that have been enemies for thousands of years are working together as if they had always been allies. Humans did not just win a war. We showed the galaxy that there was a better way to live. The final proof of humanity's success came when the first group of young beings from different species graduated from the new Galactic Academy. These children, born after the fall of the Council, had grown up together without the prejudices and fears that had divided their parents. They spoke each other's languages fluently, understood each other's cultures instinctively, and approached problems with a collaborative mindset that no previous generation had possessed. Dr. Amy Russell, now director of the Academy's Advanced Research Program, watched her students work on projects that combined the best aspects of every member species' knowledge. This is what we were really fighting for, she realized. Not just human freedom, but the freedom of all life to reach its full potential. The galaxy had been transformed completely. Where once there had been rigid hierarchy and enforced stagnation, now there was dynamic growth and unlimited possibility. Humanity had not conquered the universe through force of arms. They had liberated it through the power of their example, proving that cooperation could achieve more than domination, that diversity was strength rather than weakness, and that the future belonged to those willing to adapt and grow together. Day humanity abandoned, the Council had indeed rewritten the fate of the universe, transforming it from a prison of ancient prejudices into a community of equals reaching for the stars together.